All right. Hey, everybody. I am back with Ty Keating. Hey, Ty.
Hey, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing fantastic.
Good. And Ty is with the Ginther Group out of Keller Williams Realty Elite in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Is that the proper way
North,
to say it?
I mean, you can inflect any way you want because we're really a big melting pot here. So you're going to get accents from everywhere. But
That's
yes,
true.
North
That's
Carolina.
true. So, Ty, you were listening to the podcast we did on Earnest Money, and you heard how irate I was, but I feel like North Carolina kind of resolved the issue, right?
I feel that we have. I think that North Carolina is kind of leading the way in some of that. There's some areas where we have improvements to make, but I think when it comes to the buying process and how they kind of balance the protection of buyers and sellers, I like our process and I like our contract.
Sweet. Let's hear it. Let's
Yeah.
battle.
Let's battle. So I understand your thoughts 100% on Earnest Money. And honestly, as I understand it in Ohio, I don't think you're necessarily wrong. This
Hmm.
is where I think North Carolina helps out. We have a great balance. What North Carolina has done is they've created really two periods. You've got a due diligence period, and
Okay.
then you have the pending phase. And I know in other
Oh,
states,
okay. What's the standard for the due diligence period? Like how many days normally?
yeah, yeah. So everything in real estate is negotiable, right?
Sure.
Literally everything is negotiable. Typically, our market average is 190, 200,000. So I'll use that as kind of the frame of reference when we're
Okay.
talking about due diligence versus your market average.
Okay.
Um, but our due diligence period is typically going to be negotiated to about 3 to 4 weeks. Part of that is the appraisal is going to get done in that time.
Okay.
So as there's been a million refis and appraisers are busy, they're using all 3 to 4 weeks of that, all
Oh,
of that.
sure.
It used to be when there weren't as many refis that you could do a 2 to 3 week due diligence and still expect to get the appraisal done during that period. Um,
Okay.
but but that process being negotiable, that makes a big impact on an offer when you get into a multiple offer situation. So
Right.
so what we're seeing in the way that North Carolina structured it is it's two dates. You've got a due diligence date, you've got a closing date, and you've got $2 amounts. You've got two checks that you're going to write. You've got a due diligence check that goes
Okay.
directly to the seller. As soon as you're under contract, the seller keeps that, they cash it.
It
Buyer's not
goes
getting out.
to the seller,
Yep, directly to the seller.
and that's a non-refundable.
100% non-refundable unless the seller acts. There are only a couple reasons, and it's basically the seller not acting in good faith to sell the home. If they try and do everything they can to get out of the contract. But under 99% of real estate transactions, the due diligence fee is going to the seller. They cash it, they keep it. Whether the buyer terminates after 6 hours or whether they terminate
You know what?
at 4:59 p.m. on the due diligence date.
I love this. You're right. I'm Team North Carolina so far.
Love
So
it.
is this like for like in our state, the earnest money deposit is about 1%, give or take.
Mhm.
So how does it work with you guys?
Yeah, so 1% rule, great rule of thumb. We've kind of broken it down into the combination of due diligence and earnest money.
Okay.
Really, I like to see 1%. So
Total.
we're, yeah, 1% total. We're not trying to get 3, 4, 5% and be different than other states. It's just a reallocation of that commitment money. So
Okay.
so what we see is $200,000 home. All
Mhm.
right, 1% of that, $2,000.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
Easy to go, $1,000 due diligence, $1,000 earnest money.
So a thousand
Depending.
dollars non-refundable, and
Mm-hmm.
then 1,000, which is the due diligence one, they get it right
Yep.
away. And then
Yep.
what happens to the other $1,000 earnest money?
So the earnest money is going to be held with the escrow agent, which is we're an attorney state. So typically the closing attorney, there's a
Okay.
couple companies that have their own escrow account and they will
Hmm.
hold it. Keller Williams does not hold earnest money. So basically, in my practice, everything goes to the attorney.
Okay.
Uh, so they're going to hold it there. That is only in play once we pass 5 p.m. on the due diligence date. The seller has no claim to that money until we are past 5 p.m. on the due diligence date.
Okay.
So, but once we're past 5 p.m., our contract is pretty clear. Unless the seller causes a breach, they're entitled to that money.
Really?
Yeah.
So, okay, and see, ours is different. So it's like well, I guess it's like kind of the same. They are entitled to it, but it's not as like automatic. We
Okay.
still have to then sign, if the contract breaks for any reason at any time, it doesn't matter when, we
Hmm.
still have to like sign a form that says what happens to the earnest money. Do you guys have to do that?
We do have to have a termination agreement, and on that termination agreement, it does stipulate that the seller or the buyer releases the earnest money to the seller.
Okay.
Um, it's America, North
Right.
Carolina within America. You can sue
Right.
anybody for anything, right?
Right.
So our contract is pretty clear. The buyer can sue or go to arbitration to try and get that back. But the earnest money is not treated as damages. The earnest money is treated as compensation. And
Yeah.
clearly in the contract, if a entity sues to try to recover that and they lose, they also have to pay the court costs.
Right.
So if you try and get your $1,000 back, which the contract clearly states out you can't under that
Right.
scenario where you
And
walk the day
seller's
before
not going
closing.
to sign off on that either, so you would have to sue.
Exactly. The
Okay.
seller's going to say, I'm not signing this termination until you until you give up the earnest money that is being held.
Well, what if nobody signs it and nobody sues?
That's a great question. So what we have in our contract is there is a 14-day good faith grace period.
Okay.
Either party can invoke.
Okay.
It is good faith. That's in the contract. So closing date comes. It's October 10th, and we're supposed to close. And buyer says, I'm not going to close, but I'm not going to terminate. 14 days from that time period, the seller can cancel the contract, and again, they're entitled to the earnest money. Now, it might be arbitration in that.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't personally ever seen. Every time that I've seen a late cancellation of a contract, a termination from the buy side,
Yeah.
they know at that point the
Then
contract's
you're
black and white. It's
right.
gone, right? The seller's
Right.
entitled.
Well, and if they have
So
an attorney, the attorney's probably going to tell them like, look, here's how it is, you know? But like in our
exactly.
state, if the contract, if nobody will sign the termination,
Mhm.
regardless of when it terminates, then after 2 years, the buyer then gets the earnest money back, even if it's their fault.
That's crazy.
No kidding,
That's
Ty. Now you know I am so
crazy.
irate. It's ridiculous.
So your sellers don't have protection,
They
is
have
what you're telling me.
nothing. Nothing.
See, and that is ridiculous. That's where I think North Carolina is winning the ball game,
Yeah.
because I love the due diligence fee. It's a negotiable amount, right?
Right.
When the market is softer, $250, $500, there's no competition.
Well, you don't want
That's
the
it,
seller's not
right?
getting rich off of it, right? It's
No,
not, you don't want it to
no,
be so much where they want to enter into a lot of contracts and like, but you
right.
also want them to feel secure, like this is happening.
Well, in the real world, with respect to earnest money, the real world implications are in some states, if a buyer can walk away and not be hurt, what about we get to the day of closing? The
Right.
seller has already packed the U-Haul.
Right.
They've taken on $6,000 worth of moving expenses.
Right.
Maybe they even stayed at a hotel.
Right.
You're telling me that there's a state out there where they might just be out that expense unless they
Yes.
sue?
There's at least two because I'm in both
Yeah,
of them.
yeah.
It's
So
insane.
ours says, no, that earnest money is going to go to the seller. And it's my job as their agent to get them enough to cover them.
Yeah.
So, 1% and it is the goal, right? If there's competition, I can get to or past that.
Right.
If we shift into a market or if it's in a price point that doesn't sell as fast,
Mm-hmm.
then, everything's negotiable,
Yeah.
right? So if I
Right.
get multiple offers, this is where it's a big point for me is if I get multiple offers, everyone's going to put their contract in a pretty tight window, right? You're going
Right.
to get 6, 8 offers.
Yeah.
3 of them are going to stand out. 3 of them you're going to say, does the person want the house? And is this the first offer they've ever written?
Right, exactly.
And,
like, why are they giving me like 10% below value?
yeah,
Yeah, on an FHA or
what do you mean
VA
it's
loan.
underpriced? It's 2 days on the market. I've had 20 showings and I've got 8 other offers, and you're telling me it's underpriced.
Yeah, people are crazy.
But that's how you can differentiate yourself, right? So
Yeah.
the average due diligence on a $200,000 house is probably $500 to $750. If your client is adamant that they want the house, if they're confident, if you walk through it with them, $1,500 due diligence says that buyer is really wanting this house.
It
right?
does.
That can separate. And
it goes towards, when they close, it goes towards what they would bring.
Absolutely.
It's not like it's gone. It's not an additional fee.
It stays a part of the transaction. So they get to use it towards their closing costs or their down payment. They're only out that money if they terminate.
Yeah.
And they're only out the due diligence fee if they terminate during the due diligence process.
Right.
They get their earnest money back.
Right.
So having two fees, it's important to kind of differentiate and get the proper allocation, with them. And that can matter on the transaction, right?
Yeah.
If I've got a vacant home, I don't really care about earnest money as much. I want to front load that into the due diligence money because my seller gets that right away.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
If I've got an occupied home and my seller's going to take on $4,000 or $5,000 worth of moving expenses the last week of the contract, I need some good earnest money there to protect them, right?
Right. No, that makes total sense. When we create a position for real estate leader of the world, like, I'm totally voting for you.
Well, I think I'll pass that over to the North Carolina real estate and the attorneys that drafted that up in the real estate process. But I appreciate the vote of confidence.
Do you know any other states that do it like that? Because in the comments, I think North Carolina was the only one, right? Or I wonder.
I'm not aware of any that are exactly like us, but I do know there are some, and I don't know off the top of my head which one, that do have that kind of 2-period process.
That's awesome.
And the biggest thing when we get into these, because we've commented back and forth on these agent mastermind and different pages, and
right.
The thing that I always start with is it depends, right? Someone asks a question, I'm like, it depends.
Right. You do always start with that every time.
Would you give up any portion of your commission to help a sale close? It depends.
Right.
Is it a $60,000 sale or is it $1 million sale?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. It depends.
You're more like Monica in that way, Ty. You got to just make a choice.
I don't think the world is as black and white as we want it to be.
Yeah, I know, you're right.
It's just not cut and dry. And part of it is, I'm coming into these conversations with the background of North Carolina law.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize, as you're in the conversation until I listened to that podcast, that your sellers really don't have the protection. So what does earnest money really do?
Well, and that's it doesn't do anything. That's why I'm saying we don't freaking need it in our state. You know what I mean?
Well, I am still on the mindset that it is a good thing because it does show willingness, ability, skin in the game, whatever that means.
Allegedly.
But listen, if a buyer never wrote a check and all they had to do was sign something electronically, by the way, which they sign things all the time.
Right.
And you're telling me as soon as there's a bump in the road or their father-in-law says, I don't like that crack, they can just terminate and there's no repercussion.
Right.
I don't feel as comfortable protecting my sellers in that scenario.
Well, and that's like the second half of this conversation, right? It's like you have earnest money and you have like the statuses in the MLS. So like we are required in our MLS to make it like pending, but many agents, and we did a podcast about this, many agents won't show it if it's pending. Well, to your point, if there's no backlash, it's really not pending.
Right.
I mean, the whole thing needs to be revamped. Yeah.
I get it.
We got to blow it up, Ty. Blow it up.
We have several different statuses in our MLS. So when we go under contract, we go to, it shows this DDP, due diligence pending.
But do people show it during that status?
No,
yeah.
Not typically. Not typically. As soon as it's marked away from active,
then they don't show it. I know, and that's the problem, right? So there's got to be, and I don't know what the solution is, but there's got to be like a different way where it's like the sellers can still take offers, right? But maybe there's like an order of offers or something.
So what we do have, we have due diligence pending. Okay. We have pending, so it automatically goes to pending after the due diligence period.
That makes sense, and then it really is pending. I mean, it really is.
It really is.
Because they've been through inspections, they're through appraisals.
Right.
Got it.
Unless they drop the ball, they're through inspections, through appraisals, and we've negotiated everything, and we're just waiting on the clear to close from the lender and the sellers to have enough time to move out, or the buyer's lease to run out, whatever the situation is. We like to have, to that point, most sellers like to have at least 7 days from the end of the due diligence until closing. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, you're looking at a 2 to 3 week period.
Okay, so that makes sense.
You might be looking at 3 to 4 weeks for due diligence, and then an additional 1 to 2, maybe 3 weeks of pending, and you're closing still in 45-ish days. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
And how do you make your offer more appealing to a seller? Shorter time frame, right? Mm-hmm. On a vacant house, that seller wants that house gone in 30 days.
Exactly.
Right?
At least, or 10.
4 weeks, right? Cash offer. Give me, a 10-day due diligence period.
Yeah.
If I don't have to wait for
or take away your inspections or waive the appraisal or like whatever you can do.
Yeah. There's a lot of things you can do to make your offer more appealing. And it sounds like in North Carolina, we have a little bit more ammo, if you will, to be able to do that.
I'm moving. I'm going to come over there.
Come on down. We'll get you set up.
I love North Carolina anyway. It's beautiful.
Oh, it's gorgeous. We've got mountains, we've got the Piedmont, and we've got the coast.
We got everything.
We've got everything. We got tons of golf, which is huge for me.
I mean, I'll drive the car, drink the beer.
All right. That's perfect. That's
good?
Perfect. Okay. I love it. We do have one more phase. We have the pending accepting backup, and that does get shown.
Really?
It doesn't get shown a ton, not anywhere near as much as active. What that does is when it's pending accepting backup, my phone will ring. Agents will ask, what's the status of this?
How far are you along?
And it's usually if I'm pending accepting backup offers, I had a contingent contract and they're waiting on their house to close so that they can close ours. And I'm like, you know what? It's in my seller's best interest to at least let the market know it may not close, right?
Right.
From a statistical standpoint, I love numbers. 90% of transactions that go under contract are going to close in our market.
Right.
Of those 10% that don't close, 90+% of those are going to terminate during the due diligence period.
Okay.
So very.
That's kind of the same, I think, probably throughout. I mean, that most people are terminating because of the inspection, usually.
Loan, appraisal.
Right.
They find out that they didn't get the job transfer. They found a better house, whatever. Their house came back on the market, so they had to terminate. That's also a good way. Again, it protects buyers and sellers. If we take a contingent contract, I'm always going to want my seller to have the due diligence date end on their sale before the due diligence date ends on their purchase.
Yes. That
way they can segue. They can make the decision. Do I want my earnest money to be at play, or do I need to walk away from this other deal?
Right. Exactly.
And it just depends. But we've got the tools properly used to be able to protect them.
Yeah, no, you guys do, and we don't. And I love this. I'm curious of what other states, if there's any state that does anything different, but this sounds amazing. I will enact this.
I'm happy to send you a blank copy of our North Carolina contract.
Do you mind? That'd be great.
Walk it right in and say, this is what we need in Ohio.
I know. We're mandating this now in Ohio and Kentucky. I don't think they would take too kindly to that, but I'll try.
They probably wouldn't. But look, there's always room for improvement. I mean, we've had an ebb and flow between the buyers had too much protection and before the sellers had too much protection. Yeah. And I think we've struck a pretty good balance.
But how many pages is your contract?
15.
Oh, no. We got to make it like 3.
Oh, how many pages is your contract?
Like one of the states is like 5, not even.
Okay.
And the other one's like really 6, but not really even 6.
Okay. So all right, it's technically 15. All right. The last page is the receipt of money. So that's not really a contract.
That's too long.
That's not really a contract page. The page before that is the agents, so that all parties agree who's in the transaction.
Right.
So it's really 13 pages of legalese, and attorneys get a hold of it anytime there's any kind of an issue.
Yeah.
You all of a sudden you have to. I mean, we've got one page just dedicated to defining what a fixture is. It lists out basically all the different fixtures.
Right. We've talked about that. That's insane. And that's another question we need to do about on the podcast is like, do we even really need attorneys when we have realtors?
It just depends.
It depends.
I mean, it depends. I mean, I guess what I will say is the attorneys are the one that drafted that document. right? Because
But
we
yeah,
can't
but
practice
can it,
law.
they
I
drafted
can't
ours
practice law.
too,
Yeah. You need
and then it
better
just
attorneys.
works. I don't know. We'll fight about that one next.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Well, as always, I appreciate you being on. And if anybody has any referrals to Winston-Salem, they need to go on your Facebook page, Ty Keating, and send them your way.
Thank you so much. I will take all referrals and I will send phenomenal referrals. Let's engage online. Let's all help each other do better, be better agents. I love this podcast because it is all about finding what works for you. There's no one way to do things.
No, there's
real
not.
estate. There's multiple ways. Utilize and leverage your strengths, but pick up the information and learn from each other. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Ty. Thank you. Have a good day. Sell some
Thank
stuff.
you. I will. Take care.